Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, how you gonna call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today reviewing the Leopard Prototype A. I'm also at the same time editing the video for artillery, so that's coming out probably next week. And I'm glad that I don't have to play artillery anymore, because I've played over 80 matches with artillery pieces, and it was not a joy. Yeah. So the Leopard Prototype A, it's a tier 9 German medium tank that you can get after the Indian Panzer, and it's probably one of my favorites in the game. One of the best medium tanks at tier 9 in my opinion. And you can see I enjoyed it very much. I marked it completely. This was my first tier 9 that I marked to 3 marks of excellence, I think, with the T-54. And it holds a very close place in my heart. Yeah, you know what I mean, right? So moving on, what do you do when you have this tank in stock? As you can see, you can mount all of the things, and you get a tank that looks similar to the Leopard Prototype A, the fully upgraded one, but unfortunately it's not. You can see right there, you have a 90mm gun, which is the same gun you have on the Indian, and this is not going to be a very enjoyable experience. I can tell you guys that much already. So what do? You can see that the gun is going to cost you the most experience, 62,000. So what you can do is basically, if you have equipment on this tank that you've taken over from the Indian Panzer, you can actually get the gun, but you cannot mount it because it will be too heavy. Actually, no. You know what? It's not too heavy. It turns out that the gun weighs almost the same as a 90mm gun. I thought it was going to be too heavy. But then I would first go for the gun. Go for the L7A1. This one will improve the performance of your vehicle by a lot. And it's going to be the main gun that you're going to be running also on the Leopard 1. It's really good, very good pen on the APCR shells. So then moving on, I would go for the new tracks because you'll be too heavy after that. And then I would go for the new engine because you'll get 130 horsepower additionally on top of the 670 you have on the BA 500 engine. Now, then after that, I would go for the top turret. The top turret doesn't have any real improvements except for view range and traverse speed. The armor is exactly the same, and in the end, go for the radio. It will cost you quite a bit of experience to get this tank fully upgraded, but I guess that's just how you have to go through, and it's definitely worth it in the end. So let's take a look at the gun. This is going to be one of the main stars of this tank, or one of the main categories that will be featured very heavily because you'll constantly be using this kind of gun. You have 3 shell types, 2 times APCR, 1 times high explosive, and you can see APCR shell velocity on all 2 of those really great. The pen is at 278mm and 323, and you have 420 alpha damage with both the shells, so very, very good. It's a very nice tank. Now, moving on to the high explosive shells, which are also very nice to have, they have 105mm of penetration, and they fly at a whopping 1,173 meters per second. Maybe one of the fastest flying high explosive shell in the game. Moving on, one of the issues with this tank is that the rate of fire is not fairly high. Unfortunately, that means your DPM, which is quite good because the alpha just doesn't really hold up against the T-54 or an Object 430 when you're in a close quarter fight, because these tanks will just eat you up. So you do not want to be in a close quarter fight with a T-54 or a T-55A because you do not have the DPM. Now, the gun traverse is okay. It's not the best. You can improve it with field modifications, but I chose not to do that. And you have 8 degrees of gun depression, which in of itself is okay. It's basically the gun depression that you should have nowadays in the year 2022, but 10 degrees would have been better. At the same time, I think 20 degrees of gun elevation is going to be quite nice, and 8 degrees, I think you cannot complain too much about it. The one thing that you have to keep in mind is that the rear of the tank is elevated higher than the front, so whenever you're trying to shoot behind you, you only have 1 degree of negative gun depression, so yeah, it's not very good. when someone is behind you. So be careful whenever you have to shoot behind you. You have to turn your tank a little bit. Now the aim time is spectacular. The dispersion is spectacular as well. This is why you play this tank, because of that amazing L7A1 gun. Moving on to survivability, we can almost skip it. You don't have any protection. It's so lightly armored that high explosive shells will make a very quick death for you, or they will knock you out very, very quickly. You do have 1,700 hit points, which is okay for a medium tank at tier 9, but that's the only thing you have that keeps you from dying. This and concealment and mobility. So moving on to mobility, this tank is very fast. Great mobility, 65 kilometers per hour when you do not run the turbocharger on it, 23 horsepower per ton with the turbocharger and with the modification. So this tank accelerates quickly as well, and it has nice traverse speed. So basically a very nice combination, making this tank very mobile. And that's something you should definitely use when you're playing this vehicle. Use the mobility. You know, if you know that your position is very dangerous and you might get lit up, run away. The tank might be able to get out of it because it has great mobility. Now moving on to concealment, you can see that the concealment has been pushed very, very much by me and my equipment. So 42.58% when stationary, 35.91% when moving. How did I achieve that? I went with the skills, I went with directives, I went with equipment, I went with the specialization of equipment, and I went with field modifications. Why is it so important? When you're playing this tank on an open map where you need to hide between bushes, you want to have as much concealment as you can have, because this tank is very large and the base concealment levels actually are not that great. I've noticed that when I played it again, because I haven't played the Leopard Prototype A in a while, that I got lit up very quickly in a fully, covered bush where I wasn't looking through, and I still got lit up because the concealment values were just really, really poor. So I pushed that to the maximum with everything that I can to get this tank to be very competitive in open space maps. And I do highly recommend to you guys to do the same, because this is going to be the concealment and the mobility are the factors that keep you alive with your HP. This tank is very difficult to play, and to be able to play this tank effectively, you really need to learn how to be mobile, how to hide, and how to not get spotted. And that's why mobility, concealment, and spotting are very important. You can see the loadout I have currently. This is all for an open map where I'm not expecting close quarter fights, or at least where I can sit behind cover and not get spotted. So this is my idea behind this setup. But obviously this is not the case. You can see the view range on this tank is 400 meters base, but with everything on top, with the binoculars, with the skills, you can get it all the way to 480 meters. That is incredible for a medium tank. Definitely you can spot so far with a tier 9 medium tank. That's really great. So this allows you to actually carry the fight to the enemy, to sit in spots where light tanks usually are the only ones able to, be. And because of the concealment and the spotting, you're able to do it as well. So let's take a look at the equipment. I went with the turbo for, more speed, better horsepower to ton ratio, and with the low noise exhaust for better concealment, and coated optics for better spotting. Now, for a close quarter engagement, what would I recommend? I would recommend gun rammer on this slot. Unfortunately, you cannot change it to a firepower slot. Then I would recommend improved rotation mechanism to increase your gun traverse speed, or maybe even improve ventilations if you want to have, even higher DPM. And then finally, vertical stabilizers. One of the things I noticed when playing this tank is that the dispersion on the vehicle when you're moving is quite high. It's 0.2, and when you're turning your tank, it's 0.12 or 14. Unfortunately for us, that means that whenever you're on the move, you have a bit of time to aim in. It takes a while to get that bloom down. So this would be my selection for a close quarter fight. As always, tell me what you would be using. Obviously, you can also use bond equipment, but that's the question if you're willing to invest into this tank, the bond equipment that you need. But generally speaking, I will definitely get a second equipment loadout for this tank for close quarter fights, and I don't usually do it, but that's because I like this tank so much. So let's take a look at the field modifications and then we go right into the gameplay. So right here with the module durability increase and the light alloy mounting points, I've been thinking about probably switching over to the light alloy mounting points, but the reason why I have module durability on this is because it ammo racks very quickly. This tank gets its ammo rack destroyed quite often, so that's why I have it in there. So if my ammo rack is destroyed, I only have to suffer a 50% penalty instead of a plus 50% penalty if the ammo rack was destroyed and I went with light alloy. So it was worth it for me. So I went with improved sight, even though the tank already has great dispersion, but I'll tell you guys why in a second. Anti-reflective headlight coating right here for better concealment. Then I went with the scouting slot because survivability you can basically skip on this tank. And then with loading mechanism. So this is why I went with improved sight right here, because loading mechanism means that you get a better rate of fire. You can get your DPM all the way up to 2730 instead of 2600 something. So that will improve your DPM, but it will decrease your aim it will worsen your aim time, your accuracy, plus 5%. So you can see that I have that to negate the changes or all the negative effects from this. So basically my dispersion is still at 0.29 because nobody needs an accuracy of 0.26. So how do you play this tank effectively on maps that are, very open, where you're fighting out against vehicles that, are behind cover? Well, we're gonna check that out. I have two gameplays prepared for you guys. One is probably a more active one, and the other one where I'm trying to be more passive. And hopefully you guys will enjoy them, and hopefully you'll learn something from them, and you'll see what the Leopard Prototype A is capable of. So let's jump over to the gameplays right now. Okay, so the first game we have is on the map Erlenberg, and we're going to be playing the right side of the map. That means the 1 to 6 line, and we're going to try to put some pressure on the enemy team without getting spotted. That's the main goal here. We're playing against tier 8 vehicles and tier 9 vehicles. This is a great matchup. Enough targets to shoot with a lot of HP, and at the same time there are no real threats where you are going to have a really difficult time penning them. Except for maybe the Tortoise and the A Phase 1 and the Object 705, you can basically shoot anything anywhere at the front and go through. So whenever you're playing this map, the middle is going to be contested by a lot of heavy tanks and heavy TDs, and getting to the middle is always a bit of a hassle, because if you're pushing from the south, I usually try to go into the position of F4 where I can put some pressure on the heavy tanks that are currently coming in from the 5 line. But a lot of times it doesn't really work out, because this position I'm currently using is filled with several tanks that are trying to put some pressure on these guys whenever they're trying to cross over. So it's a very dangerous thing to go into F4 or F5 at the early stage of the game, but it can pay off sometimes. It's a risk that you might have to take. Now keep in mind, I have very good view range, I have very good concealment, so I am feeling quite confident in my ability to move up here and get a little bit of a pressure on this Leopard Prototype A. And as you can see right here, he doesn't spot us. We are able to put a shot into him. I do back up just in case, waiting for the 6th sense to pop, but it doesn't. We put another one into Leopard Prototype A, and he's just sitting in a very awkward position where he can't really do anything against us. He's already lost about 800 HP by this point, and you can see how quickly it can go. It's just 2 minutes and he's down 50% of the HP. That's how World of Tanks is sometimes. And we're going to put another shot into this Leopard Prototype A, and he gets knocked out. So your life in this tank can be very short-lived if you do not pay attention to where you go. That Leopard Prototype A was in a very awkward position, a very bad position for his tank. He wasn't going to be able to do a lot from there because he had to utilize his armor and he wasn't going to be able to stay hidden. So unfortunately, he was taken care of very, very quickly just at the beginning of the match. He could have been a lot more dangerous if he would have stayed a little bit further back at the enemy base or even out on the K line. Because right now, it's all about how do we actually surround these guys, because we have a very nice part of the map controlled. We have the north controlled, we have the A line is under our control, we control the 1-2 line, and basically we're just probing if there are any tanks down on the J and K line. Because if we can get tanks on the J and K line, we all of a sudden have flanking opportunities on the tanks that are in the city, which aren't really doing a lot, and they're taking quite a few losses so far. We do have almost 3000 HP advantage to the enemy team, and now the question is, when do we make a move? Because I'm waiting for this WZ-120 1FT. He's currently sitting right there looking at the K line. He's sitting behind a bush, and now I'm curious if we should push the south, because I want to have an impact on this game, and at the same time I do not want to die very early on because I made a very aggressive push. But the WZ-120, he makes a move, so I am going to trail him, because together we might have a much better choice at defeating anything that is down on the K line. And it turns out there's actually nothing down here. They completely have ignored the K line, but it's not always as easy. The G-Sor, as you can see, drowned himself, and he was on the K line, and he wasn't willing to defend it by himself. So now we have some shots into the south. We have shots into the middle part. The question is only, can we find some targets from here? Because it's going to be quite difficult to actually get some good hits in. But unfortunately for us, the WZ-120, he moves on. He really wants to get in there, and he wants to get involved in dealing damage and getting some kills. So he pushes the standard B. I do track him with the first shot, but it's a bit awkward because I know the standard B is going to be coming around with the Scorpion G in a moment, or he's going to be coming around. I put another one into him, which certainly was going to be penning him. Now the question is just, what do we do here? So this is where you use the camo of your tank. This is where you take a step back and you take a look at your surroundings and you play accordingly. This is a medium tank with very good camo rating. This is a medium tank with very good view range. So basically, whenever I'm staying in this little bush right here, I'm going to be able to put the first shot into the standard B. And if I move backwards, I can definitely hit the standard B from here. But we do spot a tortoise because I just seen it pop up somewhere over there. The first shot, a little bit of a mistake by me. I should have moved back so that the tree isn't transparent. Second shot goes right through the side of the tortoise. And now it's all about doing damage. And you can see the rate of fire, obviously it's not the best compared to other tier 9 tanks, and sometimes it's a bit weird that we're bouncing very nice shots on the side, but it must have bounced off the top of the back. But you can just see that with 278 millimeters of penetration, you don't have to dip into gold shells, you don't have to do anything of that sort, and you just have to be patient. So what we see right there with the standard B is he actually knocked down a tree. So we know somebody is in there. I am alerting my team of that change, and the game has actually become quite close once more. They're controlling the middle, and we are controlling the south. They do know that I'm currently in here. The standard B does know that I'm somewhere around here because he's been hit by me twice or 3 times. And now it's all about taking care of whatever is still down south without getting ourselves into too much danger. So there's the Scorpion G. I am actually able to see him, and because of the new system, I can actually engage him and knock him out. So we now have one less tank in the south to worry about, and our team is slowly but surely cleaning up the north. We didn't have a massive impact in terms of doing massive amounts of damage, but I think this gameplay really does show off the capabilities of this tank very nicely, and being able to cause damage from a distance with a very reliable gun. So we track the tortoise and we just spot a Scorpion G, or a Scorpion. And when we're moving back here, we're actually able to hit him if we had the gun depression, but 8 degrees of gun depression aren't enough. The Scorpion is going to move around, and we see the standard B, so I make a choice right now, and my choice is to utilize my HP that I have remaining, and I engage the standard B because that's the more dangerous tank. It has an autoloader, and because we don't have any HP, I kill him first, then I switch over to high explosive, knock out the Scorpion G, do a whopping 549 damage with the high explosive shell, and we end up winning the game, having done I think about 4,800 damage with 2 hits, one of it from the standard B that we didn't see, and another hit on the... I think I hit another tank, but I'm not really sure. But at least it was something along the lines 4,500 damage. Combined, it was almost 5k. So, yeah, this is the perfect scenario for a Leopard Prototype A, when you can dictate when to shoot these tanks, you know, and they're closing in, and you can just basically utilize your great camo rating when you have everything maxed out. And with that beautiful gun, you don't have to worry about not being able to hit the targets, or bouncing off targets, or not being able to do any damage because you have beautiful high explosive shells, which I really like to utilize on a lot of tanks. Doesn't even matter if it's a medium or a tank destroyer. I like to shoot high explosive at so many vehicles because this high explosive shell is very, very potent. So I'd say, without further ado, what does it look like when this tank is in much more, you know, active fighting and involved in much more aggressive plays? So I'd say we move on to the other gameplay and take a look at that. Okay, so for the second game, we're going to be taking a look what the very nice Leopard Prototype A does in close quarter combat and where its limitations really are. We are playing on Live Oaks, or North America if you've ever looked at the replay name of this map, and weren't able to find it because it's titled North America. But either way, you can see we're in a tier 10 matchup, but we have a lot of tier 8 and some tier 9 counterparts. There are only 3 tier 10s, so generally speaking, we shouldn't have any problem, especially with the amount of penetration that we have. But one of the issues is still that we lack any real conceivable amount of armor. We are very easily knocked out if we're going in first, but as you can see, it's also nice to have that top speed, that top mobility. 70 kilometers per hour top speed, that's on par with the Hellcat. And that Hellcat, that used to be one of the fastest tanks in the game. Wait, is this the Hellcat in World of Tanks that's so fast, or is it in War Thunder? Either way, it doesn't really matter. I remember the Hellcat being extremely quick. Either way, because of the very good view range, we spot the STA-1, and we get a little bit of assistance damage, and we put a nice 424 damage shot into him. As I mentioned prior in the first part of the review, you can see that the dispersion of the tank is a bit lacking, especially if you do not have everything kitted out with the field modifications. You can see that it takes quite a bit of time to get that bloom out of the way, even though that the aim time is quite good. The thing is just that because of the aim time, not because of the aim time, but because of the dispersion when you're moving, you do lack a bit of accuracy. So even now, I'm trying to be the second tank that comes into an engagement, not the first one. But as you can see, the guns will still turn towards your direction when you're driving somewhere. And he's surrendering, he's putting up his gun into the air, but it's not gonna work, and he's going to die. And yeah, basically anything is going to be dangerous for you. They will be able to pen your tank, and it's not gonna feel very nice when they hit you. Once again, we have the opportunity to shoot some tank destroyers. We put some pressure on the T-30, and we also almost knock out the Waffenträger of Panzer IV. But because of the lack of rate of fire, because we didn't really go for DPM, and I don't have the second loadout on this tank yet. You can see that we're lacking a bit of the damage per minute that we would have had if we went the other way. But it's not too bad. I mean, we're still doing fine. We can still do more damage. We just have to find more targets. And you can see a majority of the enemy tanks have gone to the town, and it's pretty much just another scenario of one team going one way and destroying everything in its path, and the other one going one way and just sitting somewhere in a place where they have no strategic advantage. Now, Live Oaks is one of those maps that usually is decided on the south, or in the south. The southern part of the map does decide if you do win or not. But now, it's all about getting closer for us. And now we want to really put some pressure on this E4 and this AMX 5100 that's trying to go back to base. Because we have quite decent view range, we actually are able to get some assistance damage off the AMX 5100, and what is even more impressive is that we actually bounced T110E4, which is something that this guy must have really hated, and we bounced the Progetto 66. That is not something you should be expecting whenever you're playing the Progetto or the Leopard Prototype A. This tank does not bounce things, and it's a very rare occurrence, and I got very lucky twice there. I just sat in front of the E4 because I didn't really care too much. I thought that I had the support from the Gorilla and the other tanks that are close to base, but at the same time, ooh, that would have been a really expensive trade. That would have been at least 1000 HP that I lost there, which wouldn't allow me to really maneuver anymore and take part in the game. But since I got very lucky, I'm still able to deal my damage and get from A to B. And as I mentioned, the mobility on this tank is amazing. The accuracy is great as well. And I'm just waiting for the Scorpion G to move up a little bit more so I can have a clean shot, taking us all the way to 3,380 damage dealt and an additional 1,760 damage on top of that spotted. So that's quite nice. That's one of the main reasons why I go for additional view range and all of that spotting. But to be fair, it wasn't really needed on this map. It's not like it took us a great deal of spotting to get to see these tanks. They were usually, most of the time, quite close by. And I would much rather have the second loadout with the additional DPM, because I would have been able to do a lot more damage than I was able to do in this instance with the spotting loadout. But still, I'm quite happy with the result. It's just one of those things, it's a luxury to have two loadouts. It's gonna cost you at least 1.2 million credits, no, 1.8 million credits for one loadout, and then an additional 1.8 if you want to have a second loadout, which is going to be ridiculous expensive. That's 3.6 million, which is on par, at least on par with the price that you pay for a tier 8 vehicle. So yeah, I'd much rather save that, and it doesn't really matter to me. We still did 5,000 damage, assisted 2,000, and got the final kill, ranking us up all the way to 5 kills in this final game, and doing massive amounts of combined 7k damage. This is a tank that can still work in close quarter fighting, but it shouldn't be the focal point of the enemy team. As you can see, we were able to stay alive because we still had a lot of HP remaining, because we weren't the most aggressive ones at the beginning of the battle. And when we had to take a hit, we obviously got very lucky with the E4 and the Progetto 66, but we were still able to survive that, even if we would have taken 2 hits. And I think the risk was worth it. We did manage to rack up at least 1,000 or 2,000 damage in that area, and we were able to spot more tanks, and only that risk allowed us to really bump this game up into a very interesting one, because the game was actually already decided very early on when we were running down this train track and we destroyed any kind of resistance down here. The game was basically already over by this point. You can see the game didn't take very long. It only took us 6 minutes to destroy the enemy force. Not even 6 minutes, but in the end, because of the mobility that you have on this tank, even if the game is very quickly over, you can still get to the points where you need to be to deal more damage and hopefully get more assistance damage and more damage out of the game. And thus we're able to do quite a bit. So generally speaking, I would have much rather been in this tank than a slower version like an E50, or maybe even like I'm not even sure. I don't even know what's slower, but like slower medium tanks, because slower medium tanks with more armor, because we were able to still be here when we had to be here to take some damage, especially in this area. So generally speaking, a very nice tank, a tank that I love very much, and I think it's time for the final verdict. So, would I recommend the Leopard 1 line only for the Leopard Prototype A? Maybe you don't have the credits, you don't want to go for the tier 10, maybe you don't like tier 10 gameplay because it's very unbalanced at the moment. Generally speaking, I think this is one of the best tier 9 tanks that you can have in your garage. One of the vehicles that is so fun, and it's just really rewarding to play when you know how to play the vehicle. It takes a long time to master the art of the Leopard Prototype A. There will be games where you will get absolutely destroyed by the enemy team, where you cannot have any impact on your team. I've had quite a few of those games as well. Unfortunately, these games will not be as much fun because your tank doesn't have any armor. You're basically just there for the ride, and when your team loses an important flank, you're not going to be able to assist much. But the games where you're able to actually, lead by spotting for your team, lead by being able to use incredible flanking maneuvers, lead by being able to run with other tanks that have more armor and you can support them, I think that's where this tank really shines. And it's just such a novel feature to have this 105 L7A1 gun that does 105 has 105 millimeters of penetration with the high explosive shell, and at the same time 278 millimeters of penetration with the APCR shell. And couple that with 1,480 meters per second shell velocity, you have an incredible gun. And don't forget, you have 420 alpha, which is amazing for a tier 9 medium tank. You can hit tanks for so much HP and they'll be thinking, what the hell just hit me? And it turns out it's a Leopard Prototype A. Now, with the right equipment, with the right skills, as I've shown you guys at the very first part of the video, you can really make this tank work in your favor and make it the most flexible tank that you need it to be. And generally speaking, having 2 equipment slots on this one is really worth it, in my opinion. Especially if you plan on free marking this tank, I would highly advise it. I didn't have that option back in the day, and I still managed to free market, and I love this tank. I still come back to it every once in a while, and I hope there are more people who like the Leopard Prototype A, because this is a great tank. This is a tank that is really worth it. So hopefully you guys did enjoy. Comment, like, dislike, whatever, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one. Peace out.